I'm Mindy Peterson, and this is Enhanced Life with Music, where we explore the ways music makes our lives better. One of my favorite perks of podcasting is the incredible people I come into contact with, especially when I get to continue a connection with them and their work after our interview is over and the episode has been released. Usually that connection ends up being through social media since we're all busy and geographically spread out. And for all of its downsides, social media does have its upsides. And this is where it really shines, in my opinion, is in its ability to help us maintain and strengthen connections with amazing people who we otherwise would lose contact with. Today's guest is one of those people, those amazing people that I've been able to keep up connections with. Pavle Marinkovic was a guest on this show in 2021 discussing his book, How to Hook Your Customer with Music. That book explored the strong influence that background music has on what we buy and how much we're willing to pay for it, and also addressed the growing field of audio branding for businesses. I'll put a link to that conversation in the show notes. Since then, it's been so fun and enlightening for me to stay connected with Pavle on LinkedIn and to benefit from his prolific writing. He does a lot of writing that spreads the word about the power of music. If you haven't already connected with him on LinkedIn or followed his newsletter, I highly encourage you to do that. Pavle has worked in multiple capacities in the last many years in the music and neuroscience realm as a consultant. He's also worked in the audio branding field. He, in addition, is a music teacher, film composer, and award-winning writer on topics related to marketing, music, psychology, science, and future trends in business. Welcome back to Enhance Life with Music, Pavle.
Well, thank you for having me once again.
I'm so thrilled that you're here again and that you've recently completed another book, especially since it's on a topic that is really intriguing and one that I don't see a lot of other people writing about. It's on the subject of the effect that music can have on our entire food cycle, from crops to animals to consumption and beyond. I love the title, Sounds from Farm to Fork and Back, How Audio and Music Can Enhance the Food Life Cycle. And in the book, you break the food life cycle into 4 stages: food production and distribution. Second stage is food selling and purchasing. Third stage is food preparation and consumption. And the final stage is food waste and cycle renewal. And in today's conversation, we could easily talk for 30 minutes about each stage, but we're going to try to keep it to a higher level, just talk about the whole book in its entirety in the 30 minutes that we have. Starting out, can you just talk a little bit about the first stage and some of the research that you found the most fascinating or that you think listeners would be the most surprised to learn about that first stage, how music can enhance food production and distribution?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's amazing to see, as you said, that we have these 2 sources of nourishment. You would say food for our physical body and music, which is food for our soul, but we never think to mix them.
Right.
We have farmers might listen to music while they work. Supermarkets put background music. We eat while we listen to music, but that's just scratching the surface of this bond. Music has practical applications for each of these stages, and it appeals to a wide variety of readers. So for this first stage, farmers, gardeners, even agricultural engineers will appreciate it mostly. And then other professions might prefer reading another stage. So consider like this first stage, which includes cultivation, harvesting, raising of crops, livestock, and other animals to produce, raw food materials. They are then transported to supermarkets for selling. So this is the first stage. And I gathered some interesting data to know first, what's happening today in this stage. So here are two key things. From 2019 to 2022, there's been like 156% increase in the number of people suffering from acute food insecurity around the world. So these are people that they don't have enough food to meet their basic needs. Well, why? Climate change, wars, supply chain disruptions. And then you have agricultural productivity, which was also declined by 34% in Africa due to climate change. And this is the region in the world that has declined the most. And, I could go on but the message is clear. We need to implement innovative and better agricultural practices because we have to ensure that there's enough food for everyone. And we have to get creative. And here's where, you can put sound and music. Mm-hmm. And why music? Well, first, because it's widely available, it's cost effective, it's eco-friendly, there are no side effects. So how many tools can say the same?
Yeah. And I love how you point that out in the book, is how music, I mean, we'll get to this later, but it's low cost, is easily accessible, and we don't have these side effects because food shortage and food insecurity has been around since the beginning of time to some extent. But a lot of the ways of addressing it that we've come up with have made the environmental challenges worse and human health worse because we're using pesticides and we're using genetic modifications that maybe the human body is not quite prepared to digest as easily. And so some of these effects that music can have on this stage they just show so much potential and so much promise because they don't have those side effects.
Exactly. We need this balance. And it's also important that you can use it in a wide scale or just locally in our own home gardens and farms.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier too, how these recommendations and tips and methods that you address in your book could be used for farmers, but also restaurant owners, bar owners. And I love the practical recommendations that you give at the end of each section for each of those different kind of stakeholders. And you kind of point out, okay, if you're a bar owner, here's what some of the takeaways you might want to consider from the information presented in this section. Or if you own a restaurant, or if you're a farmer, or if you're a home gardener, a chef, a store owner, these are the practical takeaways from this content for you to consider. So just want to point that out.
Yeah, I mean, every chapter, every stage has its own audience. So for this one, the first one, there's some cool experiments that gardeners and, these green thumbs people can enjoy. So, for instance, this is one. In 2014, there was a group of Indian scientists that compared how rose plants react to different types of music throughout their development. These rose plants were exposed to 60 minutes of music at 6 a.m. for 62 days. A lot of sixes. And a group of plants were listening to devotional Indian music, Vedic chants. Others were listening to Western classical music, and some had rock music through loudspeakers. So after 62 days, the results were fascinating. When roses listened to Vedic chants, they grew taller and developed a higher number of flowers and are larger in size.
And that was listening to what music?
To Vedic chants, devotional Indian music.
Okay.
Yes. And then they even grew towards the speaker, towards the source of music, as if they couldn't get enough of it.
Wow.
But on the other side, when they listened to rock music, their flowering size and frequency were the lowest, and they were the first to sprout thorns and had more of these thorns than any other plants in the experiment. They were like trying to defend themselves.
Wow.
And there was a similar behavior in the terms of growing, in the sense, away from the speakers. They were trying to put as much distance between them and the speaker.
Wow.
So one research after another shows the same, sadly, for these fans of these genres, rock, heavy metal, and similar genres are detrimental to the growth of different types of plants.
So it's not enough to just play music for plants. I mean, you have to know what kind of music is going to positively impact their growth and the nutrients that they're producing, that type of thing.
Yeah, they have preferences just as we have. And why would that happen? Why are they so against these genres? Well, scientists are unsure. There's not a consensus yet, but there's some working theory that these genres create more intense sound waves and vibrations, and this could mess up with their peace of mind, or they create more stress that plants can't handle very well. So, as you said, we need certain types of music that they really work. So these are some tips for the gardeners. So we have, if you want to increase the plant growth, you would use genres like classical music, devotional music, in this case, the Vedic chants, soothing music. You should also use moderate to low volume, up to 80 decibels. And you should use put the music for up to 3 hours per day for at least 4 weeks. That's around how much they usually use them in this research. So we've seen first that music can enhance plant growth, but there are other things that music can do. One of those is the resilience towards pests.
Yeah, that was fascinating to me. I mean, the music can cause the plants to produce more nutrients, and it can influence a plant's height, the number of leaves and flowers, the flowering time, the germination speed, and crop yields, but then also its resistance to diseases and pests. But keep going. It's all so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the growth also is paired with more health. There was like an experiment in Korea that focused on the music's capacity to stimulate plant resistance to disease and pests. And this was a 2-year-long study. They would use 3 music conditions on different vegetables. So you would have radish, Chinese cabbage, spinach, carrot, cucumber. And they would use 3 music conditions. One was green music, which would be a mix of classical music with natural sounds. Think about birds, insects, water flowing.
Yeah.
There was another music condition with ultrasound, which is sounds are above 20,000 kilohertz. And then the third condition, no music at all. And they would put music for 3 hours each day from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And in those 2 years, they found that the vegetables listening to green music had 18% higher yields than the other 2 conditions.
Wow.
And then both music conditions showed fewer insect pests compared to the no music group.
Wow.
In a way, music was enhancing plant health and the resilience, and it kept pests away. And this is not something new when it comes, at least, to ultrasound, because it has been used to repel rats, plant hoppers, and birds without disturbing humans.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And going back to your explaining the problem at the beginning of our conversation, where we do need to increase crop yields to reduce world hunger, this is such a great tool that we can use to help with that.
Exactly. It dissuades all these different insects and animals to be nearby these crops.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. You mentioned in the book that there's historic evidence that shows that music was used by indigenous societies around the world. And I think there were multiple factors involved, multiple reasons that they used music. But I think one of them was because they saw some kind of beneficial result with crop yields and resistance to diseases and pests. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, music has been around for ages, and they would discover that there's some kind of link that also pertains other areas of our lives, like food. And then there's also another thing that's like the elephant in the room that everybody or many people know about, which is, cows giving more milk after listening to relaxing music. That's something something you always hear about.
I don't feel like people do always hear about it. Like I hear about it because I follow your newsletter and follow you on LinkedIn, but I don't feel like that's something that everybody's talking about. Maybe in Europe it is more.
Well, at least the media learned about this back in 2001.
Sure. And I should mention, I don't think I included this in your introduction, but you're joining me from Madrid, Spain right now.
Yep. I'm in Madrid. Yes. Yeah, I mean, there have been several studies on this with cows, with different. When it comes to cows, it's very interesting. There was one study in 2006. Cows were listening to Indian classical music. I guess many of these studies come from East Asia, or Asia, and that's why you hear so many, devotional chants.
Sure.
Because I think they're more open to this kind of studies.
Sure, and they're more common genres in that area of the world.
Well, when it came to Indian classical music, they saw that the cows were producing 13% more milk on average.
Wow.
So the music would start 10 minutes before milking them, and then it would continue until the process was over. And it was also interesting that there was one more thing, behavioral. Cows were more willing to approach the milking system. You know that this can a little bit be noisy and threatening, but with music, for them it was easier to approach. And, people that work with them, it's easier to handle them when there's music around. So
It
cows
probably
were
took
more
less
docile.
time to get them, all situated to begin the milking process just because they are more willing to approach.
Exactly. Cows were more docile with music, and even workers enjoy their work more because there was music around. So it's like a win-win situation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. From these studies, they would see that cows like Beethoven music, they liked country music, Simon and Garfunkel. So they have like pretty specific tastes. So you have more milk, less stressful environment, and workers enjoy their job more.
Sure. And you get more milk in less time.
Exactly. The thing is that there's one more thing, but it's not a win-win situation. It's with broiler farms. So in this case, well, the chickens have a better life, but well, they're killed at the end.
Sure.
But the interior, if you've been in an interior of these houses where they have all these chickens piled together, the noise is pretty loud, stressful. It gets up to, I was reading somewhere, it was 90 decibels, which is like a roaring motorcycle 26 feet away, I think.
Wow.
So it gets very stressful for these chickens. And one study was putting classical music intermittently, like 1 hour on, 1 hour off. And they found that it reduced the stress of chickens. They would go eat more, and they would increase their weight by up to 15% more than, the control group, which didn't have music, in an 8-week period.
Which decreases the time that farmers are paying to feed the chicken and saves in feeding costs. And I believe another study showed an increase in egg production too, correct?
Yeah, this other company, Happy Egg Co.
Love the name of the company.
Yeah, but they're more focused on providing a better environment for their hens. One of these tools they use is a sound-enriched environment. They even created their own album for hens that any farmer can get at their SoundCloud. And yes,
they had it commissioned, right?
Yeah, and in this case, the increase was 6%.
Wow.
So the motto was like, happy hens make more happy eggs.
Love that. Well, I've got to think too that when music is reducing the stress for the animals, whether it's chickens where we're eventually consuming the meat or we're consuming the eggs, or with cows where we're eventually consuming the milk or the meat, I would think that lower stress experienced by the animals would result in more nutrient-rich product, because you're not having all of the, whether it's adrenaline or whatever it is that the animal's producing. I imagine that there's something negative that ends up in the final product that we're consuming. I don't think that was part of the study necessarily, but it would be interesting to find out if that is the case.
Yeah, I mean, there's toxins that are released when these animals are in stressful environments, and this also gets into the meat, into the products they give us.
Right.
So without that, it's much better. It's a much better quality and healthier for us as well.
In addition to music, I am passionate about health and well-being. For me, a healthy lifestyle includes eating a diet that is mostly whole, unprocessed foods. This is pretty easy when I'm close to home, but living a full life often takes us away from a convenient refrigerator and a predictable schedule. Enter my favorite whole food energy bar. Jam Bar is a certified organic whole food bar, non-GMO and gluten-free. Created by a food science and nutrition expert, athlete, and musician, Jam Bar is packed with protein and fiber and minimally sweetened with only all-natural sweeteners. It doesn't need to be refrigerated and has a 1-year shelf life. These bars do not melt, freeze, or crumble, which means they can go from a day of ice skating in Minneapolis to a trip to the beach when I'm visiting my daughter in Florida. The only problem with those beach trips is keeping my kids from eating all my bars because they love them too. Fuel your full life and healthy lifestyle with Jam Bars. Available at Amazon, select retailers, and jambar.com. For more info, you can also visit episode 160. Links are in the show notes. Tell us a little bit about how sound, so this isn't necessarily music, but sound, ultrasound is being used to reduce food waste, because that was another part of the book that I found really fascinating.
When it comes to reducing food waste, there's a Chilean how do you call this? Like a new innovation system that they have,
Yeah.
which they use ultrasound to detect the quality, the ripeness of fruits. So they can penetrate these different layers of the fruit without harming them. And you can know beforehand if it's ready to be harvested or you have to wait a little bit longer. And they had this system when they would process a lot of fruits. I don't know the rate per second, but they could get.
I had written that in my notes, 1 fruit per second. Just because I thought it was, I'm like, okay, that's great that it's pretty quick. So 1 fruit per second.
Yeah, and from that they can know if it's ready to be, transported or cut from the trees. So it's another way to reduce the amount of waste that ends up because you didn't take care of which type of fruit was already ready to be harvested or not.
Yeah. And with a 93% level of certainty, which seems very accurate to me. And it's non-invasive, so it's not damaging the fruit at all. So again, just a really great way without any side effects to reduce food waste.
Exactly. Yes.
And also, I think that ultrasound was used in some sort of a nebulization system that could inhibit fungal growth, which also reduced the need for chemicals by up to 40%. So another great use of sound in the food production process.
Yeah, and that's why the book is called Sounds and Music, because sometimes it's not about the actual complex music or genres or rhythms. It's more a more simpler way of taking sound as a tool for these different applications.
Yeah. Now, stage 2, I mean, like I said, we could spend an entire 30 minutes just on each of these stages. But
Yep.
for stage 2, I know that some of this material builds on what you talked about in your first book, How to Hook Your Customer with Music. There's a little bit of overlap on the topics, but it's addressing that second stage, food selling and purchasing. And you talk about how music really can influence how much time we spend in venues like restaurants or bars or food stores, whether it's a grocery store, a wine store, things like that. The music can also influence how much we spend during the time that we are there and how much we're willing to spend per item. So all of that really fascinating. You do build on some of that material in talking about how music versus no music can impact some of these consumer behaviors. Other musical attributes like volume, tempo, how familiar customers are with the music, what genre it is. That was really fascinating. Anything that you want to mention on this stage that you want listeners to know before we see if we can hit stage 3 also?
Yeah, before 1970s, nobody cared about music as an element influencing purchasing behavior. So it's important to take consideration, that this is a very new way of using music.
And
So,
you mentioned Philip Kotler in your book, and I was like, oh my goodness, that takes me back to my marketing classes in college. I remember using one of his books was one of the textbooks in one of my classes.
yeah, the guru of modern marketing. I mean,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
introduced the idea of atmospherics. And that idea was that different sensory channels, smell, sight, hearing, could influence consumers. And he even thought that these atmospherics could be more influential than the product itself. So sometimes the context is everything.
Mm.
So while I was working in this audio branding firm, Soundity,
Uh-huh.
I had to interact with different companies and see how to use music to enhance their message, whether it was an ad, sonic logo, corporate song. And one thing became clear there, that audio creates an immersive experience for the consumer. So you could think about the following things. There's a certain craving when you hear the pop of a Coca-Cola can.
Mm.
When you hear the crunchiness of chips, if it's louder, it's like even tastes better, and much more. So you
And
were
that
talking about
study, of course, was using Pringles.
Yeah, of course. you have to sell the brand. And you said something about the time spent in grocery stores. So the initial studies in this area were from the 80s, and they saw that slow tempo music could increase people's time spent in grocery stores to up to 38%. Music would change your walking pace, usually unconscious, or sometimes you might stay longer at certain aisle and you don't know why. And the idea was that if you spent more time inside the store, you were more likely to purchase more products.
Mm.
And what kind of music does the trick? There were some certain features. Low volume. You had to have music with low volume, slow-paced music, thinking about this walking in a slower pace to be able to see more products. The music has to be familiar to the audience, and it has to have a simpler structure, which is usually...
So those are all attributes that cause people to spend more time in the venue. Is that
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
But also, sometimes you want people to stay shorter. And when you want that, you use fast and loud music. And this is usually what's used in bars, if they know how to use music strategically. Because you want people to have the drinks, leave, have new customers in. And, when the music is loud, people will drink more because there's no way you can hear each other talk.
And that is a great segue into the next stage, actually, because you tell a story in the book about the first time that you realized music affected people's food habits. And so this third stage is food preparation and consumption. But tell us quick that story of how you first realized the effect that music had and how that plays into what you're starting to talk about with bars and restaurants and how the speed of music affects our consumption.
I would play at bars and restaurants as a musician. I would play violin there, usually. And we had a varied repertoire with some slow songs and some fast, cheerful songs. So I would sometimes glance at the audience while we played, and I would start to realize something. Whenever we played Balkan and klezmer music, which is very energetic, people would renew their drinks more often. They will nod to the music. They will seek the waiter more often. But then with the more intimate repertoire, they would take longer to drink. And it wasn't something they would do consciously. They were just adjusting their behavior to their surroundings. And in this case,
automatically without thinking about it.
Yeah. And music was helping make that shift. So that was the first time I realized that there was a link.
Uh-huh. So if people own a bar, play fast music, loud, and that's most likely to get people to be drinking more and drinking faster and refilling their drinks more. And if you're a consumer and you're trying to restrict how many calories you're taking in, then be aware of this when you go to bars. If they're playing fast-paced, energetic music, you might be more tempted to refill your drinks more often.
Exactly. And you're not paying attention and you're just anxious, trying to consume more.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned in the book, too, that low volume has been shown to increase the sales of healthy food products, which I found I'm a health geek. And so that really caught my attention, too. Like, ooh, interesting. If you're a manager at Whole Foods or you're at a store that's selling healthy foods or a restaurant selling healthy foods, that low volume can allow people to probably be more aware of what they're eating and just enjoy the process and not be so distracted by the loud, fast music, but to be more mindful of what they're consuming.
Exactly. You want them to be thoughtful about what they're purchasing, what are the ingredients, the calories. So low volume music allows them to take the time to do those conscious decisions.
Yeah. One other thing that I found so fascinating in this stage that you talk about in the book is how other sounds affect our senses of taste. You talked about how in an airplane, you asked, did you ever notice that airplane food tastes funny? And I just kind of laughed because I love food, but airplane food, yeah. Yeah, like that is one thing that I do not care for. But you talk about how the plane's low buzz sound affects our sense of taste. It enhances bitter and umami tastes and diminishes sweet and salt tastes. And then you kind of talk about some of the other sounds and music attributes like high-pitched notes that can affect sweet and salt tastes. And then I love that story that you tell about how you applied that research to a chocolate sound taste experiment. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was reading about how music would change the perception of taste for beer, for wine. And I said, well, let me try it with the chocolate because I love chocolate.
Touche.
And
Me too.
and there's a really nice vegan chocolate factory in the middle of Madrid. I actually went there one day, and it was funny because I started talking to the owner, and I heard some Serbian in the background. A woman was talking on the phone, and I said, "Oh, this is Serbian," because I'm from Serbia.
Oh,
And
okay.
he said, like, "Oh, this is my wife." So it was very cool to find another Serbian in Madrid.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Wow, cool.
And this family, this lovely family, had this opened recently. This factory, and I asked them if
And
I
what's
could
the name
do
of the chocolate factory?
Cacao.
Okay, we'll give them a shout out here.
Exactly.
Kaicao. Kaicao.
Yeah,
Got it.
It's named after their son.
Okay.
And they would do tours inside the chocolate factory to show how the chocolate was made, and they would give people to try different types of chocolate. People would do this tour, they would taste different chocolates, and then they would come to my station, and I had 2 bowls of pieces of chocolate, one next to each other, and they would take one bite from one while they were listening to either low pitch or high pitch sounds. And then they would, I would ask them to rate how bitter or how sweet was this chocolate for you. And then they would do the same for the next bowl. In this case, they would, if they first listened to low pitched music, then they would listen to high pitched music and the other way around. And I was asking them the same. How much did you like it? How bitter or sweet this chocolate was. Mm-hmm. And then they would start rating them differently. And I was curious, like, why would you do that? But I was seeing how music was changing the perception of taste. And I saw it, I saw it with my own eyes. It's not just something I read. And then I would tell them, like, this is the same chocolate. It's just in 2 bowls. And they would look at me, and they were so baffled. They couldn't understand. Like, they would say, like, this is, I felt it differently. It's not the same chocolate.
So when they were listening to lower pitched sounds or music while eating the chocolate, they perceived it as more bitter. And when they were listening to high pitched music or high pitched sounds, they perceived the taste as sweeter, even though both of those pieces came from the same chocolate bar.
Yep. The low pitch music, in this case, enhanced 22% the perception of bitterness, and the high pitch music increased, a modest 5%. And this is
okay.
The chocolate was already 70% cacao, so it was more bitter.
Okay.
Maybe it's more difficult to draw people outside of bitterness when the chocolate is already bitter. Uh-huh. High pitch music, which was more liked also, had another effect. People were more willing to pay a higher amount for this chocolate, roughly a third of the sample, because it was more exciting music. They liked it more, and they unconsciously transferred this excitement towards the product. And they were willing to pay, instead of like $8, 10 or more bucks for this chocolate.
Wow, that is so fascinating. Well, and you point out in the book too, in this section, how for consumers who are trying to make healthier nutritional choices, maybe less salt, less sweetener, you could add a pinch of sound to the mix if you have this understanding and awareness of how sound influences our taste perception. So if you are trying to cut back on sugar, maybe listen to music that is higher pitch, because then you already are enhancing that perception of sweetness without having to actually add sugar to what you're consuming. The other thing that you point out is helpful tips for medical professionals like doctors, because you point out that people who are going through chemotherapy often have really severely diminished appetites. Their taste, perception, and sensitivity is really affected. And just in the last 4 weeks, I've talked to 2 different friends who are going through chemotherapy and specifically brought that up. So I was really interested to read that and how doctors can use this knowledge and awareness of auditory attributes of food items to kind of heighten taste perception for their patients, to give them hopefully a more enjoyable eating experience.
Yeah, I mean, this sonic seasoning, if you know how to pair different sounds with different tastes, you can enhance these tastes without any additional components and improve the whole food experience for these patients.
Yeah. One other thing that you include in this section, in this stage, is 4 things for consumers to think about next time they go into a bar or restaurant, to identify the background music and then ask, okay, what types of songs is this venue mostly playing? What genre is it? Is it fast tempo, slow? What volume is the music? Second question to ask yourself, does it fit with the ambiance, or is there a disconnect? Third question, can you notice if the tunes are influencing the behavior of your fellow patrons? And then fourth question, take your time. I guess this isn't a fourth question, but just a guideline to take your time and see if the venue is harnessing music's power for their benefit. So super interesting things to consider next time any of us is in a venue like this.
And this is maybe against a little bit the way music should be used very unconsciously. So if you're so aware, maybe the influence is lower on you.
Sure. Well, I think most of us, we are unaware of it unless we are really intentional about, I just heard this information or just read this book that Pavle wrote. And now I'm really curious to pay more attention and be more intentional about noticing these things. And as consumers, for sure, we can use it to our benefit in terms of reducing or being more aware of how much we're drinking if the music is loud and fast. And if listeners are making decisions for a food store or a restaurant or a bar, you can definitely use it to your advantage from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, there are different tips when you know how to use. I always say music is a powerful tool when you know how to use it.
Yes. Well, as I knew I would, we went over and we haven't even gotten to the 4th stage. Is there anything really quick you want to just tell people to whet their appetite, pun intended, for that stage 4 section of your book, Food Waste and Cycle Renewal?
Just a very interesting anecdote from a sewage center in Germany. They were using Mozart operas because people heard that there was something with classical music that enhanced the production of milk in cows. So they said, why won't we use this with bacteria to degrade all these waste? And after a year of using music, the sludge was reduced to 1,000 cubic meters in this sewage center, which is roughly half of an Olympic swimming pool. And they saved 10,000 euros on costs on transporting the sludge. There's so many things we can do. So what's the excuse for not giving music a chance?
Yes, great point. And there are so many quotes from the book that I loved and had pulled out and would love to read all of these, but I'll just pick a couple of them here. One is, I believe that we can optimize the food cycle for greater sustainability, but also consumer enjoyment and marketability. These goals are not mutually exclusive. We can redefine and enhance the current state of the food industry and show that there's another way to do business, care for our well-being, and revitalize our planet. Love that quote. And then one more that I'll read that kind of is just a great summary of the content of the book. By expanding our awareness of how sound and food interact, we can harness this connection in powerful ways to transform not only how we grow our food and what we eat, but also how we experience and engage with food. And that's the end of that quote. But who doesn't love music and food? So I just love this book that combines the two. I also love the illustrations, the front cover illustration. Shout out to your illustrator. I'll let you say the name because I know I'll completely mispronounce it. Tell us the name of your illustrator.
Yeah, he fun fact, he's also my violin student.
Oh, really?
His name is Aitor Acosta.
Okay.
It was wonderful what he did there.
Yes. Well, I just love that front cover. It's so descriptive of the contents of the book, but it's also so artistic and colorful. It really grabs your attention and it's sort of fun and playful and whimsical at the same time. So love that. And then at the beginning of each stage in the book, there's an illustration that is a play on piano keys. It's very clever and I'll let readers see it for themselves without describing it anymore, but love the illustrations. So tell us real quick, where can listeners find your book and also find your popular newsletter, Sound Awareness?
Yeah, so the book is on Amazon. So it's just an ebook for now. Maybe it will be one day hard copy, but for now it's just an ebook.
We'll see if we can help propel it to hard copy status.
That would be great. And the newsletter is called Sound Awareness. And it talks about all these topics. Food is just one of them, but you can talk about how it enhances different parts of our psyche, how it relates to health, how it relates to nature. And there's so much that music is related to that we don't even know about. And here's where you can find that.
Great. And I'll include links to those in the show notes as well. Well, this has been fascinating, as I knew it would be, Pavle. Thanks so much for coming back on the show. I ask all my guests to close out our conversation with a musical ending, a coda, by sharing a song or story about a moment that music enhanced your life. Do you have a song or story that you can share with us today?
Yes, in this case, it's a song I wrote while I was playing around during my time at film scoring studies. And it's a song called Feast that inspired me to write this book. It was one of the songs because it was intended as a song to be played in a medieval banquet. I always look at it as something that would be in a movie, maybe someday. And it was linking food and music. It also made me think music can go beyond just the food eating experience, and it could take into account the whole food cycle. So this is Feast.
What a perfect song to use as a coda for this conversation. Love it. Here's a little clip of Pavle's composition, Feast. Love the song. Thanks so much to Pavle for joining us today and for all he does to enhance lives with music through his books and his other prolific writing. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to get Pavle's books and follow his Substack newsletter. As always, all the links are in the show notes, as well as a transcript of this episode and links to related episodes you may enjoy, including my first interview with Pavle, an episode on sonic branding, what it is and why it matters, and an episode on how artists and songwriters get paid when their songs are streamed or played in a store, like the stores we were talking about today. All Enhanced Life with Music episodes are evergreen, so check out the back catalog for more ways that music can make your life better. You'll find today's show notes at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast. This is episode 177. A link to the page is also in the episode details right in your podcast app. If you haven't already done so, be sure to hit the follow or plus button in whatever podcast app you use to listen. This is free and conveniently delivers each new episode to your device when it releases, so you don't have to search for it. Following the show in this way also gives you access to the latest addition to the podcast, mini microhands episodes that are about 5 minutes each. These bite-sized episodes are like quick musical snacks. We're sticking with the food theme here. And they offer tips, hacks, resources, and personal anecdotes to inspire you to enhance your life with music. As always, you can connect with me on email, mindy@mpetersonmusic.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Until next time, may your life be enhanced with music.